In this section, we're going to discuss how we define new data types by writing Java classes. Often, a new data type models or exhibits behavior and knowledge of a real world entity. Not always, maybe it's a conceptual entity. For example, consider a student in a university setting. There's certain information about that student that would be important to know, yet there's much information about an actual student that would be unimportant. For example, shoe size rarely would ever have relevance to a student, but name, age, GPA would be very relevant to a student. Since there is no primitive data type that represents all three of these together, we have to write a new data type. We'll call it a student or a student class. We would aggregate name, age, and GPA together in one unit and consider that the student has a name, has an age, has a GPA, and there are operations on those that we can perform that make sense, like get the name. That would be equivalent to asking a real student, what is your name, or what is your age? We would have an operation to get the age. We use internally these primitive data types or other classes like string, int, double, to remember the attributes or pieces of information that the object must remember. Recall, the point is to create a new data type that aggregates as a unit these disparate pieces of data into one, so it acts and feels more like a real student. Our class would represent a minimal amount of information. Minimal but essential. We don't want to run down the rabbit trail of putting in every possible thing about this student. Only the things that are interesting and important to solve the problem we're working on. The set of operations are the behaviors or actions or operators that work on objects of that class. The written description, which is the data type, the class itself, defines those needed data items. It must define how to initialize them. That's a very critical aspect of class design. And then, of course, the set of operations is how do we manipulate those objects? What things can we do to them and with them? Primitive data types are fairly passive. We as programmers tell them to remember information by assigning, or we ask them to reveal the information by using that variable name in an expression. The variable doesn't really do anything. It just reveals and remembers. Objects need to be considered much more active. We don't directly access their information. We must ask them for it specifically. We don't just put the name of the object in an expression and expect its value to show up. For an object that may have multiple data fields, it doesn't make sense to just use the object name in an expression, because which data field would be revealed? So we have to ask it. In the case of a student, we'd say, what is your age? What is your name? What is your GPA? The object itself may make a decision on how to reveal that answer. We'll get into that more as this progresses. Since objects are active, a program must always provide two pieces of information to get anything from an object. First off, which object are we talking to? And secondly, once we know that object, what action do we want to perform on the object?